Hello everyone, my name is Niall and welcome to Nid-life Crisis. In this video, I am rescuing a Killa Kan to add to my Ork army. I bought a single Killa Kan on eBay to go with the two I have at the moment. Due to the new rules in the 9th edition Ork Codex, Killa Kans now have to be a minimum of 3 to a unit. This is one of the models I already have. When I compared it to the one I just bought on eBay, I noticed that the body was upside down. I couldn't leave it like that, so I decided that I would take it apart and build it the other way around. I started by stripping the mini off its base. It had been super glued, so it came off without too much of a problem. Then I set to work with the isopropanol. I wasn't too bothered about getting rid of all the paint, I just wanted to get to the joints of the mini. As it turned out, the model had also been super glued together, so with a bit of persuasion I could pry the parts apart and get the mini ready to flip over and put back together. With the pieces apart, I could tell that the back was fitting quite nicely. The sides, however, didn't fit very well, so I could see that they would need a bit of adapting. I prepped the back area and glued the part in place, and then got to work cutting and trimming the side pieces. I cut the larger fixing lugs off with the cutters and then set to work with the craft knife, scraping and whittling away until it was nice and flat. With a bit of trial and error, I managed to get the sides to a point I was happy with and glued them in place as well. I wanted to replace the weapons that came with the mini because I already had one with the same claw and scorcher. So I went into my bit box to see what spares I had. Luckily I had a saw and a rocket launcher left over from my death dread, so I could use those. Weapons decided, there were a few small gaps that I needed to fill, so I mixed up some green stuff and set to work. I don't use green stuff very often, so I tend to mix up too much, slap it on and work it all in, making sure to keep the tool wet so that it smooths it out nicely and doesn't keep dragging it off. Although the bottom of the mini wasn't really going to be seen, I had plenty of green stuff left over, so I decided to carry on. Gap filling done, it was time to fit the new rocket launcher. I cut the ball joint off that was still left on the mini and then lined up to put the rocket launcher on. I then cut the ball joint off the rocket launcher, drilled and pinned ready for glue. With the mini assembled, it was now time for paint. I thinned down some black primer and then sprayed the mini all around. I gave the mini 2 thin coats, and by the time I'd finished it looked like a new model. Even if you could see any of the other layers of paint, I don't think an Ork would have stripped it before he'd repainted it, so it didn't really matter. I always prime my minis black. It makes the shadows look really dark, and if you miss any bits it doesn't really matter. While the primer dried, I decided to strip the base of all the residual covering. I stuck the mini to the base and then went all over with the gunmetal in the airbrush. This is one of my favourite paints. I put this on all of my tanks and machines. It's not too shiny and it gives it a lovely look. Gunmetal dry, I hit it with a chipper medium and leave that to dry for about an hour. Then I got the wet palette out and started to base all of the areas that I was going to paint yellow with Corax white. With my infantry models I tend to use a zenithal highlight with the white ink, but as I've painted this a metallic colour, I thought I would just target individual areas. I haven't thinned this white at all, I'm just picking it up off the wet palette and I'm just using a 1-coat system as I'm going to follow up with yellow later. As I was painting this, I decided that I would do a split down the middle for the yellow rather than all over like I did with the previous cans in my army. The yellow I'm using is Avalanche Sunset from Citadel. I did thin this slightly on the palette, mainly because it is so difficult to get a thin smooth coat with the yellow paint. I decided to use one of my smaller older brushes for this, slapping the yellow around hoping to get it in all the places it needed to be. I repeated the process on the other half of the model with Abaddon black, not thinning it down too much because you get pretty good coverage first time. I then decided I would put a chessboard pattern on the shoulder. I've done this on a couple of my infantry models and it came out quite well. I start with the outlines, then blocking in with black every other square. Don't need to be too neat at this stage, you can always come back in with black and yellow to tidy up the squares. Next I introduced a couple of different metallics, a copper brass colour to the saw, moving on to the feet. This breaks up the gunmetal colour and gives a nice variation to the model. I also have a gunmetal blue from Vallejo Model Colour. I love this coloured metallic. I use it to pick out different details such as the chimney, and then I move on to the grille by the eye. I tried to pick out the frame around the green as neatly as I could without impacting on the paint. Now to give the Mini a wash. I mix Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade 50-50 and add a bit of Midwinter Medium. This gets sloshed all over the model with an old brush, making sure that you don't get too much pooling in too many places. This gives a nice dirty, grimy look that matches in with the rest of my army. With the shade dry, I move on to basing, putting PVA a little bit watered down all over, following up with the textured sand to match in with the rest of my cans. And now for the big reveal. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. They match quite well without looking exactly the same, and most importantly, moving forward I can now use them as a unit of 3. Thank you very much for watching. This was my first video. If you stuck around this far and you could leave me a comment, tell me how I did, like, subscribe, all that jazz, I'd be very grateful. And who knows, maybe I'll get round to doing another one.